Start.
All right, today is January 16th, 1975, and I'm speaking with Rabbi Emanuel Rackman in New York City. I think first of all we should have some background as to what your function was during this period of time.
When Rabbi Philip Bernstein accepted the assignment to become advisor on Jewish affairs to the theater commander, he telephoned me from Rochester and asked me whether I wouldn't join him as his aide. I consented, but I told him that I could only get away for the summer of 1946. That would mean for the months of June, July, and August, but I would have to return at the end of August. I was agreeable. The areas in which I worked especially were areas which would hardly be those that Rabbi Bernstein could cope with. For example, there's no reflection on him at all. He did a magnificent job. The question of reparations in general, before I went to Germany, I was briefed by both Dr. Jacob Robinson and Dr. Nehemiah Robinson with regard to the whole project. Everything was involved, and so I met frequently, sometimes with Rabbi Bernstein, more often even without him. I met frequently with General Clay in Berlin, and especially with Mr. Madden, M-A-D-D-E-N, who at one time had been the head of the National Labor Relations Board in the United States and was the legal advisor to General Clay. And these conferences were principally with regard to reparations, restitution, but more specifically, the area in which with regard to which he and I spent hours, was the question of the library, the discovery of the books.
Is this the Offenbach?
The Offenbach collection. And I tried to explain to him, and he was very sympathetic, very cooperative, that it would be the sheerest folly to return those books to Germany, or let them remain in Germany, to restore libraries to communities which were going to be Judenrein, even though it was a valuable collection, perhaps worth something to the German economy, but these books belong to the Jewish people. They are the heirs of the community, of the German Jewish communities. And I developed a theory which is known to lawyers, a theory of the doctrine of Setui, C-E-S-T-U-I-Q-U-E. It's simply a doctrine that when a man leaves a bequest, a will, or establishes a trust for a cause which has disappeared, he leaves a bequest to the Society for Prevention of Cruelty to Animals, and no longer is any cruelty. Then what the courts must frequently do is think in terms of applying the funds to a project that closely resembles the intention, or that which the testator or the settlor of the trust might have wanted. And that in this particular case we ought to apply this doctrine here, that those who assembled the libraries, those who contributed to the libraries, certainly intended that they shall be used by the world at large, but especially by Jewish communities and by Jews. Therefore, we should, the heirs of these collections are really the Jewish people wherever they are. And one of the difficulties I did have with him was I would perhaps argued strongly for the deliveries of all the books, the delivery of the bulk of the books to Israel, and he wondered why it wouldn't rightfully go to the Jewish community of the United States, which was at that time many times larger than the Jewish community in Israel. But I couldn't complain about that. I was an American citizen wearing an American uniform. I couldn't forfeit or waive the rights of the American Jewish community, but I did argue that Israel was not yet a state even, but that it was going to become inevitably the center of Jewish learning. and that Jewish communities from all over the world would wend their way to Israel, to Palestine. At that time it was still Palestine. So that was one area which involved a lot of negotiation, talk, and I felt it was a very important area.
Can we go into that even greater detail? As much detail as
Pleasure.
you remember.
Yes. That's, of course, very difficult. It's almost 30 years ago. As I said, what I do recall is Madden being very sympathetic to this doctrine, this approach to the problem. His only concern was that for the United States. Now, I left in June and in August rather, and when I left, my work was divided into two. I had been active on the legal end of it. This is one example of it. Since I had, as a matter of fact, I had practiced law up until entering the military service. I haven't since the war, World War II, but at that time I was fresh from the practice of law as well as from the rabbinate. So I served in two roles. One was what one might call a welfare role, and the other was a legal role. And that was an important consideration where again, I was replaced by Abe Hyman, an attorney, in that capacity as the lawyer. I was replaced by Herb Friedman in the welfare role, dealing with the Jewish communities. It related, though, to this problem that I had with Madden. There's another problem which will perhaps...
What happened to the library itself?
Subsequently itself, they did to make distributions. It did not, most of it did not remain in Germany. But this problem was typical of other situations. Let me give you an example. I made one trip down to Regensburg. There was a problem in the Jewish community in Regensburg. And this was not atypical. At the moment, I remember Regensburg because the man with whom I dealt later came to the United States and we established a relationship. In Regensburg, you had a conflict between the surviving German Jews of that community, who numbered about 10 or 15, and about 1,200 Jews who had survived the Holocaust and had come from the concentration camps or from through Bricha and settled in Regensburg. The great problem was the rivalry between these two groups. The 12 or 10 or 15 who are the German Jews felt that whatever the Regensburg municipality would do should be done for them. They are the ones to whom the Germans owe the debt. And they were, as a matter of fact, you heard expressions. I attended one meeting of that group at which you heard expressions that were typical of those you heard in the 30s, that the Ostjuden, that the Polish Jews were to blame for what had happened. That same kind of expression came out even in 1946. Upset me very much. I talked to some of the people about that attitude, but it was still there. But what happened was that the group, the 1,200, I think it was about 1,200 Jews that had come to Regensburg, wanted to have a shul built because the municipality was ready to replace the shul. The 10 or 15 German Jews felt there was no need for it. They didn't know how long they were going to be staying in Germany, and they wanted the synagogue rebuilt. And there was this conflict of interest between the two, and I was called in to talk about it, to try and at least keep peace within the Jewish community. Now, I can refer you to a man who...
so what happened with that, by the way?
We convinced the 10 or 15 that the shul should be rebuilt. Again, there was this feeling of how... as I said, I was there only for 3 months, so much of that, what I did was followed through on later on by Abe Hyman or by Herb Friedman. But I point to this as an instance of some of the problems we had, the conflict between the Jews of the German Jews, those who survived, the surviving German Jews, and the other Jews, Jews of other parts of Europe that had survived the Holocaust. If you want to contact the man, he's now in Lawrence, Long Island. He was then rabbi of the 1,200 in Regensburg.
Joseph Glatzer.
Glatzer, right. Did you talk with him?
Yes, I've spoken.
So did he discuss this with you at all?
Not yet. We haven't gotten to that point.
This was Glatzer. I mean, I remember it well because later on, Glatzer was a neighbor of mine on Long Island. Now, in another area which we were active, of course, was in connection with the Bricha. And there we had, again, it's very hard to say what finally happened.
sometimes we weren't even privy to. I frequently compare this to the role of, in medicine, of a radiologist who helps the doctor makes a diagnosis, but plays a part even in the therapy, but doesn't ever know whether the patient lived or died, because that's handled by somebody else. We had, in this question of bricha, for example, there came to Berlin a man who, how the word spread, that I can't tell you, but we were called in.
Who's we?
Phil Bernstein and I went up to Berlin to see what I could do about it. A Jew from Russia had come through bricha, not just a Polish Jew, but a Jew from Russia who had stayed on in Poland apparently after the war, and was a munitions maker, was an expert on Russian armament, and wanted to go to Palestine. The American military got wind of it, and this was something that they felt would be very helpful to the United States, the Secret Service of the United States, to get information through this man, from this man, with regard to his whatever knowledge he had of secrets, weapons secrets, and so on. They called us in. They didn't know the identity of the man. And the
Who's they again?
the American military.
Yeah,
Didn't know
but
the identity.
do you remember
The
who?
man came to a camp, came to one of the camps established for the bricha, and the director of the camp apparently was told by someone. Whether the director of the camp knew the identity of the man, I don't know, because the members of the Jewish brigade who were engaged in the bricha had secrets which they didn't reveal sometimes even to those with whom they were working with. It was really an underground organization. It was very secretive. But the word had spread, and I met with the representatives of the bricha. With them I did meet. Why did I meet with them? Because the American armed military asked me to convey the offer of the United States government to transport this man to the United States for only a few days, and give him citizenship, that they were willing to offer him anything, bring him to the United States. If he wanted to go back to Palestine, they would expedite that. All they wanted to spend a few days in Washington.
They realized how important he was, or
either they realized it was important, or they were willing to gamble on just the rumor and the hearsay that this man was so valuable. We met. I met with the bricha, with the men in charge of the
do you remember
bricha.
who they were?
No, back 30 years. And we talked about it, and I mean, what I do remember is their not only their refusing, but the rationale for their refusing. If he's that important to the United States, he'll be doubly important to us. This is, of course, before the establishment of the state, and therefore they were anxious not only to get him in through Aliyah Bet, but to bring him to Palestine with a certificate. In many cases, they controlled the issuance of the certificates.
Wasn't it a mistake in terms of goodwill for the United States?
It might have been a mistake, but at that time we have to understand the United States was not what it is today vis-a-vis Palestine. There was very little to indicate that the United States would even recognize an independent state. So Truman, these were the days when people were running the State Department who were hardly inclined to do what Truman did, and that was to give immediate recognition to, or at least de facto recognition of the State of Israel. And so they did not regard the United States as a hostile power, as they did England. But by the same token, they just weren't sure to what extent the United States would cooperate with England. As a matter of fact, very often we heard this. As I said, though I was officially a chaplain, I was not attached to chaplain corps. I was not responsible to the chief of chaplains of the European theater. I was responsible to G5. That was the group in charge of the DPs. And General Mickelson always used to say, he was British, General Mickelson, who headed G5, used to complain that sometimes we weren't giving him enough cooperation, and that we were forgetting that one of these days the United States and Italy would have to fight Russia together, and it wasn't nice that we weren't giving England the cooperation. That came up, for example, with regard to why we didn't help them find, apprehend, and arrest Sylvia Newlander. They weren't getting cooperation. We knew
they were after her?
Oh, yes, and I, every time there was a transport and another 1,000 came in Bricha, and the trucks were requisitioned illegally for passage, and Mickelson would bang the table and said, "That's that damn Sylvia again." It's like a Robin Hood who was emerging from all kinds of spots. Now, this should be of interest, made perhaps in another connection. I was thinking in terms of this bricha, one religious question that I was consulted with, which I would go down and handle. I don't want to say a halakhic question. This happened while I was in Munich, and while I was in the office there of the...
Do you remember what month that would be?
It would be June, July, or August.
Yeah.
It would be a woman, I think it was in the latter part of my stay there, so it should have been late July or early August. Okay. A Polish woman in whose home the Bricha boys found a Jewish child. A remarkable Polish woman, a Polish Catholic peasant, who shielded this Jewish child, and after the war did not try to retain the child, and didn't seek to give the child up for zlotus, for the cigarette money, the cigarettes we used to bring to Berlin. 100, 200 cartons at a time. My bags, I never carried any clothing, but I always had full bags of cartons. All she wanted was to go to Palestine with the child. And she was a remarkable Polish peasant who kept on reminding the child that the child was Jewish. And even, the child wasn't very old at that time, it was I think 5 or 6, the child knew Hebrew prayers. She had managed somehow to get somebody to teach the child the Shema and the Motzi. And the great question of these men confronted, this child was going to go with a certificate, not through Aliyah. A bet. The agency people had decided to take this child, as they did with all children, get them through legally if they could, rather than illegally. The question was whether they could afford to give her a certificate. After there were a limited number of certificates, every certificate was precious. And would they be doing right? Would they be doing right to give up a certificate for this Polish peasant who wanted to accompany this Jewish child, didn't want to be separated from the Jewish child? And we had sat down there and discussed it at great length.
How is it that they came to you to ask?
They knew I was a rabbi, and they felt was a moral problem, a halakha problem. There are, after all, problems in halakha, who you say first, right, and so on. I ruled in favor of the woman going, but I wasn't sure of my halakhic ground. Certainly, Svarim I didn't have with me to be able to work with. But we had a long discussion, I remember, on that, and the pros and the cons. And we decided in favor of her going. Now, if you ask me, did she and the boy ever arrive in Israel? I assume they did, but I don't know. I don't know really the outcome either.
But you knew that they had agreed. In other words,
I met the woman. I met the child.
But
yes, there was we came to a conclusion to give her the certificate.
I see.
Yeah. These this type of problem came up frequently. One of the last things I did, I know this was in August of 1946. Was when the rabbi, I think his name was Sneg, he is mentioned, I think, in Schwartz's book. He had been a chaplain in a Jewish chaplain in the Lithuanian army.
Mm-hmm.
He's not Russian, he was Lithuanian. He was almost blind, great trouble with his vision, and he subsequently became totally blind. Very fine, very sweet individual. He came to see Phil and myself, with regard to the possibility of republishing the Talmud in Germany. The problem wasn't a problem of funds, because the Joint Distribution Committee, especially with Leo Schwartz heading it in Europe, everyone felt this would be a great morale booster. And the problem was whether to get paper, and I remember interceding to get paper from the German economy. The paper was scarce. It wasn't a question of getting the paper from the U.S. Army. It was a question of getting it from the German economy. This was one of the great problems even with kosher food, getting it from the German economy, which was depressed, and a lot of the meat was being imported, and if you used cattle for locally slaughtered cattle. But we didn't get too involved in that, but on this paper thing we did get involved, and we were able to get the consent for this. And after I returned here, I was sent a copy of Metzia, which they had published, which I have in the library at home. This type of morale booster meant a lot because Jews were trying to get back to normal. They organized, for example, a yeshiva at Silsheim. That was not too far from Frankfurt am Main, where we had our headquarters in the IG Farben building. And I used to visit the yeshiva at Silsheim. I spent one Shabbos there with Rabbi Eliezer Silver, now deceased, who was then the head of the Agudas Rabbanim in the Vad Hatzalah. One Shabbos we spent together in Silsheim, and it was a very inspiring Shabbos. He spoke at great length and gave great moral. It was a great moral boost in morale for the individual. Now this small yeshiva, these are things of human interest. They may have had about 20, 30 older students. Was without books, without any sforim at all. This is even before we started publishing Shas. They were able to get together some of the old, but they needed other books. A library, you can't have a yeshiva without a library. I did send a letter back to the States. This was early. I started visiting Salzheim in June. I sent a letter back home, and one philanthropist in Far Rockaway gave me some money to started selling sforim from S. Goldman, who was on the store on Clinton Street, near Rebbe's bookstore. But something very cute in the human interest story that happened. They discovered that I had taken with me for my tour of duty, a sefer by Reb Shimon Shkop, known as the Sharei Yosher. Completely out of print. It's been reprinted since, but at that time it was already out of print. Magnificent work. They discovered that I had it. I had taken it with me for my own use during the summer I was going to be in Germany, and pleaded with me to lend it to them, which I did. It was returned. The understanding was it would return. I'd be able to take it back with me because it was out of print. It was a very valuable volume at that time. I got it back, not in perfect condition, but that didn't bother me. But what thrilled me was to come back 2 or 3 weeks later to the yeshiva and find on the bulletin board a schedule. Each student was able to use it for a 3-hour period. And the schedule ran through 24 hours of the day, from 12 midnight to 3 a.m., from 3 a.m. to 6 a.m., from 6 a.m. to 9 a.m. Now, they had divided up the use of the book over a 24-hour day, so that each one would get a chance to use it. So I felt the book was put to very good use. These are some of the things I think give you a little bit of the spirit of things we were trying to do. But of course, the major enterprise was trying to organize them as a community. And there you have, this meant not only trying to reconcile different factions among the Jews, because it was already highly organized politically. When people came in, they already knew to which party they belonged. The survivors of the Holocaust were already in 1946. It wasn't only the adults who might have had some knowledge of the political parties, but the children knew to what party they belonged, because if a Mapai Shliach or Madrich had gotten them out of Stettin, he already had indoctrinated them and said, remember when you're asked that your father and mother were members of Labor Zionists, or so on. And if Mizrahi Madrich, Paul Mizrahi Madrich, and remember your father and mother was Paul Mizrahi. This gave me an enormous problem in another area where I had to be active. Lindenfels was a typical situation. In Lindenfels, there were already several hundred children that were placed. and this was an under supervision. I got called in to help resolve problems. It was a very particular situation. The children, while there were 150 or 200 Jewish children, I don't know the exact number, each knew what party he belonged to. And the director of the camp wanted me to prepare a curriculum for a school for children when 1/3 was asking for a curriculum a la the Mizrahi schools in Israel, and 1/3 was asking for a curriculum a la Mapai, and a third curriculum wanted a la Tarbut in Poland, or like a general Zionist orientation. And it was great discovery for me when we sat down to actually work out a curriculum that, except for practically arithmetic, it was impossible to get common classes in common, because everyone agreed you had to study Bible, and you can't study Bible without an orientation of one kind or another. Everyone agreed you had to study Jewish history, and that meant an orientation, a particular philosophy. Everyone agreed teaching of Hebrew, what kind of a text you would use, even for Safrut, even for Hebrew Lit, what kind of materials what kind of images would be portrayed. And it turned out that practically, except for maybe Dikduk and arithmetic, there couldn't be a common curriculum. And we had to really work out. There was objection even to being in the same building, and there weren't that many facilities. Those with kippot being in the same building with those without kippot, and we had great difficulty. We had great difficulty working out a curriculum, but it became, you might almost say, like the Zramim. Later on, the Zramim, the different Zramim and Chinuch in Israel, we had to anticipate already in 1946. Now, I don't know, I'm trying to think of what other areas, maybe you can think of some questions.
Yeah. Well,
Was any of this new to you, any of these problems?
Yes, some of these problems were, I mean, I heard before. I wasn't familiar with the fact that you were involved in this type of activity. I knew some of the rabbis were. What about the Bad Hatzalah? Were you involved in any way with them?
The only way I was involved with the Bad Hatzalah was when Silver came, and when I helped him in Salzheim, especially. We spent the Shabbos together in Salzheim, and it helped to introduce him to some of the people in Frankfurt. Again, the language problem was a problem, so I went along with him to some of the important people, like Murphy, who was it Robert Murphy, who was the ambassador, or political advisor. He was a political advisor to the general. Yeah, he was meeting with him. So naturally, I'd go along with but actually, in terms of the work about Hatzalah, I wasn't active. Well, first, you must remember that I was a chaplain from 1943. When the Bad Hatzalah was active, I was in military service. I left the military service in January or February of 46. I'd just gotten back to civilian life, not even really gotten back to civilian life. I went back to school for a few months to finish my coursework for the doctorate. And then Phil called me in April or May to go back with him. So I really was pretty much detached from Jewish life, Jewish communal life in the United States from 43 on to 46. But in their work in Germany, I had very little to do at that time, except, as I said, to more like be with him and help him during the period of his visit.
Now, were you in Germany, let's say from
June till August?
No, that was only 1946.
Right, that was the only time. Right, that was the only time I was in Germany.
I see. Before
that, I was mostly here in the United States.
I see.
Yeah.
Now, how would you describe your role as a chaplain? You say you were a chaplain, but you weren't really involved with the.
I was a chaplain from 1943 until February 46. I was a regular chaplain with troops in Texas. Then later on, I taught at chaplain schools of the Air Force.
But when you were the aide to Rabbi Bernstein, you weren't
right. I had no formal attachment at all to the chaplain's corps. I wasn't responsible to the theater chaplain at all.
But you were sent over there because you had been a chaplain.
Right. Phil picked me, I suppose, because of my chaplaincy experience. I imagine also because he felt that the rapport I could establish with Yiddish-speaking Jews, and also with, let us say, the religious, those who survived, those survivors who are observant, and that I might be able to establish rapport with them, as for example in the case of the Yeshiva Salzheim and other such groups.
Let me just